Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Let's Be Frank About Sports. I am your host, Frank Cugino. The 2019 World Series is finally over, and it is the Washington Nationals that are victorious, defeating the Astros in Game 7. And in Game 7 in particular, the Nationals won 6-2. And really, this was a very good World Series. Personally, let's get this out of the way, as a Met fan, not the outcome I was hoping for. You never wanted a division rival to win. I wanted the American League team to win. In this case, the Astros. Plus, they have some players that I like to watch. Guys like Altuve and Correa and George Springer. And you got, Verlander and Cole. They're very exciting, very talented players. And I just thought this was a good team. A close-knit group of guys. Battle-tested. They've been in the playoffs many years in a row. Deep into the playoffs, unlike the Nationals. Astros won the World Series in 2017, and they were definitely a favorite not only throughout the regular season. They became a bigger favorite during the trade deadline when they acquired Zach Greinke. That was supposed to be a big deal. And Greinke, this was probably his best series of the three. And going into the playoffs, the Nationals were not projected to make it very far. They were definitely the underdog in just about every series. Other than, I would say, the championship series where they defeated the St. Louis Cardinals. But what really stands out is that, now that we know who won the World Series, that's the team to really look at. Because if you're the Mets or the Yankees or the Tampa Bay Rays or the Astros, you're trying to find different ways so that you could become the champion. What did the championship winning team do that you could learn and then be more like them and then be a champion yourself? And the big thing that stood out throughout these playoffs and throughout the season also is just the resiliency of the Washington Nationals. And that's something that is very tough to just find on the open market or with trades. You're not just going to be like, okay, now that we saw what the Nationals did, now we're going to be really resilient. It doesn't really work that way. You have to find the right group of guys. You have to have the right manager. And you also do need some talent. That's one of the very interesting things about the Washington Nationals is how many years that people did think that they were going to go to the World Series and make those type of predictions that the Nationals would go all the way because the talent was too good to have so many underperformances that they did in the playoffs. The Nationals weren't getting bounced in the World Series or in the Championship Series. We were not seeing the Nationals even get out of the first round and sometimes didn't even make the playoffs, like the year the Mets went to the World Series in 2015. So, it's about time that the Nationals did this. With the money they spent on guys like Max Scherzer, who obviously was worth every penny, and Steven Strasburg, and, they made the offer to Rendon that he did not accept. That's going to be a major storyline, not only for the Nationals, but really all of baseball, because Anthony Rendon is that caliber of player, and you really saw it in this postseason. When Rendon got hits, and he gets a lot of them. This is a guy who was in the race for the batting title, in the race for the National League MVP. When Rendon hit his home runs, they were crucial home runs. They were, game-deciding, game-changing home runs, clutch hits that Anthony Rendon got, and you can't teach clutch. That's if I'm a team that is, considering getting Anthony Rendon, this World Series, I think it definitely increased his price, but it also increased how much I want him. I know if I'm the Mets, this would be my number one offseason goal, would be to sign Anthony Rendon. I would like to keep Zach Wheeler. Obviously everybody wants Gerrit Cole, but I just think that for the Mets in particular, Rendon can make a major difference for them because of the position he plays, the type of player he is, and what he could do when it counts. And that's something that's really important because we talk about this whole idea of postseason Kershaw or World Series Justin Verlander, which you kind of saw in this series. Verlander didn't pitch horrible, but the numbers are what they say he is in the World Series. He is 0-6 with an ERA around 6. So that is not very good at all, especially somebody of Justin Verlander's caliber, especially a guy that has done well in the postseason other than the World Series. And he was a huge reason why the Astros won it. He was probably one of the biggest reasons the Astros won in 2017 and one of the big reasons why they got this far this year. But for the Nationals, the resiliency, you just can't teach it. When they were struggling in May and they were out of it. They were many games under 500, double digits, under 500, and it just didn't look like the Nationals were really going to be able to make the postseason because the Atlanta Braves were so good in the division. The Phillies had a lot of expectations with the talent they had. Mets general manager Brodie Van Wagenen spoke a big game, didn't really back it up, to be honest with you. Yes, the Mets had a nice second half, but they were not the team to beat, and were the team that Brodie Van Wagenen was talking about them being. Whether he meant that or not, still, the Mets, and it was just a very tight division at that time because the Mets were beating the Nationals. And again, from a Mets perspective, it's definitely frustrating to watch a team in your division, a team that won the wild card, be the team that wins the World Series, because all year in the second half when the Mets were making that run, since I'm a Met fan, did all my podcasts every single day, and just every podcast, everything was about the wild card and trying to make the wild card and how could you get there and then what happens once you make it. And just like the fact that the Mets had a very good chance at making that wild card, and with all the head-to-head matchups that they beat the Washington Nationals, they could have beat them in that wild card game. I mean, maybe they don't, because it just seemed like destiny with the way the Nationals made these miraculous comebacks all the time in this postseason. It's hard to do it that many times in one postseason. But the Mets could have been the team that was in the World Series. I don't think they beat Houston, but the Mets have the pitching to match up with Houston, and Houston left a lot of guys on base in this game. And what's also really interesting about Houston to go along with that is in the Yankees series, we talked about timely hitting, clutch hitting, the way the Yankees were not able to get the big hit despite getting a lot of runners on base, having the bases loaded, multiple runners on base, not being able to drive them in. And a lot of times for Houston Astros, they did the same thing. I mean, there were a lot of games where the Yankees and Astros were both leaving a lot of runners on base, but the Astros were getting the big home runs, the late home runs with guys like George Springer, Jose Altuve, Yuli Gurriel, Carlos Correa. They would just hit these big home runs. There were a few walk-offs in that series, Game 2 and Game 6 for Houston. So it was like they struggled all game with driving in the runners that are on base, but when it's down to, all the way in the end, then Correa will hit his walk-off home run, or Altuve will hit the walk-off home run. I mean, that was just the way the Astros played, and it just seemed like they became a team that had a lot of all or nothing going on. It seemed like there were many times where most of their runs were from the home run ball. A lot of solo home runs. Every now and then you get a 2-run homer, 3-run homer, a grand slam that Alex Bregman hit. He definitely was much better in this World Series compared to the American League Championship Series, which was something that was pretty much supposed to happen. If you look at law of averages, how good Alex Bregman was all season, and even better in the second half, the way he struggled so much against the Yankees, you figured it just couldn't last. Alex Bregman was way too good to struggle that much. But in the World Series, definitely looked more like the guy that he was during the regular season, and could be the American League MVP. We don't know who that's going to be. Some are going to vote Trout. Some are going to vote LeMahieu. Some are going to vote Bregman. I don't know if someone will vote for another player. But those are going to be the guys in the running, and I think that Bregman is definitely very worthy. For me, it's a toss-up between Bregman and LeMahieu. I've said that before. I know Trout is great, and he does everything. He's the best player in baseball and one of the better players you're ever going to see. But if I look at most valuable player, I want a player that wins. I want a guy who does it all year, performs in the postseason. You don't know if Mike Trout performs in the postseason because he's never there. So, that's one of the deciding factors for me. I look at the versatility of guys like Bregman and DJ LeMahieu, the way they played all over the field because of injuries and different things that go on throughout the regular season. So that's also one of my criteria that I look at. But in this series, the Nationals, they got a lot of clutch hitting, and it came mostly from their big four, really, the top of the lineup. But mostly Anthony Rendon and Juan Soto, they both were massive in the series, hitting a bunch of home runs. And then Howie Kendrick, and it was so reminiscent. And the home run that Howie Kendrick hit in Game 7 of the World Series reminded me a lot of Game 5 of the National League Division Series, one of the big hits that really got the Nationals going when he hit that home run off Clayton Kershaw. A home run you did not expect. I know, it wasn't a home run Kershaw. I'm sorry. The grand slam off Joe Kelly. I was thinking of the home runs that Kershaw gave up earlier to Rendon and Soto. But the grand slam that Howie Kendrick hits in the 10th inning against Joe Kelly after they intentionally walked Juan Soto. And it just seemed, very similar to that, where there are a couple runners on base. Howie Kendrick is up, Juan Soto gets walked, and Kendrick just cashes in and gets a huge hit. And he was a massive reason why the Nationals were able to win the World Series. I know Strasburg got the MVP, and he deserved it because he had been great the whole postseason as well. But it's just that someone like Howie Kendrick is a veteran who's bounced around the league. You talk about the Angels. Howie Kendrick was with the Angels for many years. He was a second baseman. Nationals brought him in. He played some left field. He played other positions for Washington. And now, at an advanced age, he was limited to being a designated hitter. And he made the most of his at-bats, getting these clutch home runs like he did in Game 7. And Asdrubal Cabrera was a nice signing for the Nationals. Didn't do that much in the postseason, but he was good down the stretch, helping them secure that wild card spot. He was important with that. Ryan Zimmerman definitely had a big bounce back from where he was. This is a guy that's been Mr. Washington Nationals, been with him his whole career, a decade, even probably more than that. And Ryan Zimmerman, he'd been an all-star player, but all of a sudden, the past few years, injuries and age both made Zimmerman not anywhere close to the player he used to be. Had a lot of struggles, particularly offensively. But he had injuries this year as well. But once he came back, I'm not saying he was the player of old, but he definitely was much better, and he was another big part. Victor Robles is another guy who he stepped up a little bit. He got a few hits here or there, and he was a guy that was good last year, had a good start to the season, but then he definitely struggled during the course of the season. But he got some hits here or there, and the Nationals, they were just so fascinating because another thing about them was we talk about all the disappointments they had, all the times they got to the postseason and didn't live up to expectation, not being able to get deep into the playoffs. And because of that, because they weren't meeting expectations, the Nationals, they switched managers a lot. We saw Williams, we saw Dusty Baker, and now they got Davey Martinez. And with the managers, it's kind of hard to grade these guys unless you watch them very intently, 162 games, because that's where the managers make the difference in the really close games, the specific decisions they make with what guys to bring out of the bullpen, what double switches to make, what lineup configuration to go to, when to intentionally walk someone, when to shift. There's a lot that goes into being a manager, but you don't know necessarily who's good or bad unless you watch them a lot. And I don't watch every Washington Nationals game, but I've seen enough because, they were in the playoffs, they won the World Series, so they had a lot of games on the national TV, and I've seen them play against the Mets a lot. And Davey Martinez, I never really could get a feel for the kind of manager he was because, like I said, I didn't have enough games, enough of a sample size to know the kind of manager he is. But, I do know one thing. You talk about the resiliency this team had and, making the plays they need to and coming through when it matters, being able to perform in the clutch. And, yes, they have players that do that. But I also just think that Davey Martinez was a part of that because the way this team played so much better. And just, again, the resiliency is something you can't teach. The way that they never backed down, and it looked like they were going to be eliminated in the wild card. It looked like they were going to be eliminated against the Dodgers. And they were behind in this game in the seventh inning. It looked like they could have been eliminated in the World Series. It looks like they could have missed the playoffs when they were struggling so much and they were over 10 games under 500 in May. Another time, so many times when the Nationals could have packed it in, but they never did. And Davey Martinez was part of that. And in this World Series, there's no, decisions where I could say, man, Davey Martinez really cost the Nationals this game. He's not a good manager. Like we could say with Aaron Boone, not being, open enough to switching some guys around, benching Giancarlo Stanton earlier, putting some other guys out there, like Cameron Maybin, maybe having a Tauchman out there. Aaron Hicks playing more, moving the lineup around, having Gleyber Torres hit higher, bench Edwin Encarnacion, you bench Gary Sanchez. There were a lot of different things that Aaron Boone could have tried. Not using Adam Ottavino, using him against different parts of the lineup, which eventually he did, but there were a lot of things that we questioned Aaron Boone about. And with Davey Martinez and the Nationals, we didn't really have many questions because, yes, they have they have a lot of talent on this team, and for the most part, there wasn't too much to overthink. It's like these guys performed. You knew you're using Trey Turner, Adam Eaton, Anthony Rendon, Juan Soto, Howie Kendrick, Ryan Zimmerman, and then you're going to use Yan Gomes and Kurt Suzuki depending on the pitchers because they like, these different catchers. That's something that has been a platoon for the Nationals. They keep switching that up. and having Victor Robles out there. Those were pretty much guarantees. And then you're going to use Scherzer and Strasburg. Those are guarantees. They're going to go pretty deep into the game because of how good of pitchers they are. But then with the bullpen, they went to Patrick Corbin a good amount. He pitched 3 scoreless innings in this World Series Game 7, which was very important because the Nationals were behind and Patrick Corbin was able to keep it close. And when you do that, you're going to get the clutch hitting like they did from Rendon and Howie Kendrick, among others. And then Daniel Hudson, I talked about before, but he was really lightning in a bottle and a major acquisition for Washington, but you go to him. So there wasn't too much to overthink. A lot of it was predetermined because of the roster the Nationals have. But at least Davey Martinez didn't try to overthink it. He didn't try to get cute and do some really unorthodox things that could have backfired big time on Washington. I don't really feel like he did anything like that, so you have to give him credit for that. And then the big thing that really, I don't want to say made me a Davey Martinez fan, but really helped me understand the kind of manager he is, was seeing that controversial play in Game 6 with Trey Turner at first base, which really, everybody knows that was a really bad job by Major League Baseball. Trey Turner should have been safe. I think it's very unfair to, punish a player or penalize him because of a bad throw by Will Harris. Because the throw is so far to the right that Trey Turner runs right through Gurriel's glove and his glove falls off, that's Trey Turner's fault. I don't really think that's fair because we saw a play in Game 7 where the Astros hit a weak ground ball. I can't remember who hit it. But when the pitcher threw it to first base, they threw it where the first baseman could reach over more in fair territory. It had nothing to do with the runner, and the guy was out. And had Will Harris made that kind of throw to Gurriel, Trey Turner would have been safe. He never would have touched Gurriel's glove. So I really didn't like that. And he was right in the middle of the bag when he got to first base. And everyone's explained this ad nauseum, so I don't need to, explain it much more. But it definitely was a missed call. And we know that there are plenty of managers, Mickey Callaway comes to mind, where they don't really get on the umpires. They're kind of resigned to the outcomes, and they don't make a big deal and really defend the players and defend the team. But the way Davey Martinez absolutely lost his mind when that play happened, and he had to be completely restrained by coaches and other members of the Washington Nationals, that's something that really stood out to me because here's a guy who had a heart procedure. So you could see the passion that Davey Martinez has, how badly he wants to win, and how much he is willing to defend his players, even at the cost of his own health. Because you know what? When you have a heart procedure, it's really risky to lose your mind like that. You risk your life, really. I don't want to over-exaggerate, but that's not something to play around with. But Davey Martinez, he was just not having it, and he gave it to the umpires more than you will see just about any other manager. So I give him a ton of credit for that. And I think that means a lot to the players that, they obviously know that Davey Martinez had the heart procedure. You think if there was a joke during the playoffs where Rendon went up to Davey Martinez and kind of went like this, making sure his heart rate was okay, just messing around. So obviously the players were very aware of that. And for them to know what he's going through and to see that he would still stand up for them like that, I just think that it makes you want to compete more. I know if I'm a member of the Washington Nationals, I know it makes me want to, push myself because the manager pushed himself for me, so I really should do the same for him. And I think that plays right into that resiliency that Washington had throughout the course of the year. And it was the main reason why they were able to finally win the World Series because they always had the talent. This team is not that different from years past. Yes, Juan Soto is better and, Rendon is more improved. He had the eye thing a couple years ago, so he's definitely back on track to where he was before he was a top 5 MVP candidate in 2014, I believe it was. And, they got other pieces here. There are Yan Gomes and a Asdrubal Cabrera and a Patrick Corbin. That definitely was a really good offseason signing by Mike Rizzo. But still, the X factor was that resiliency where, even though the Dodgers looked like the better team on paper or the Astros were the better team on paper, because the Nationals just never gave up and they made sure that no matter what the situation was, they would stay in it and get the big hits. I think Davey Martinez is a part of that. And you know what? To bring it back to the Mets, the manager is important, and it's just really drives me nuts that they did not get Joe Girardi. I'm going to save that for another podcast. I'm still waiting for the Mets to decide, whenever that is. I don't know. Maybe I'll have gray hair and it'll be 2020 and it'll be right before opening day. Because the way they've had a bunch of rounds of interviews and they still don't know who the manager is, that's been driving me crazy as a fan. But this World Series was one of the better World Series in recent memory. And I think this whole idea of home field disadvantage is really what it was, as the road team won all 7 games of the World Series. And I found it fascinating that in the sports that have, the multiples, they have series, not like football where it's one game, but, hockey and basketball and baseball, that none of these series has a team, the road team, won at least the first 6 games. And in this case, it was all 7 games. The way that's never happened in the other sports, I know in certain sports, home field advantage is a big deal, but just the fact that it's never happened when you have that much of a sample size. Think of how many playoff series there have been between those 3 major sports. For this to never happen, I think it was just really interesting. And what was so crazy was with the way the road teams were winning and just the matchups and the final scores. There were close games, there were blowouts, there were consecutive blowouts, and then the other team would come back and win the next 2 games. From game to game, you didn't know who was going to win the World Series. It looked like you really felt like the Astros were going to win this. Like it was going to be easy, even though the pitching matchups were going to be good. And then you saw the Nationals win the first 2 games, and you're like, now it looks like the Nationals are going to win. But then the Astros bounce back, and Scherzer has the neck thing, and his arm is messed up. You were talking about resiliency. I'm not, Max Scherzer is definitely a crazy guy to watch, but he definitely has a lot of resiliency to pitch after going through what he did, where he couldn't even move his arm or whatever, couldn't put a shirt on. But then you think that Astros are going to win because the Nationals went to Joe Ross, and the Astros took advantage of that. They go up 3-2 on the series. Then the Nationals win Game 6, and you're back to like, all right, who's going to win? And that's what just made it such a great World Series. You're on the edge of your seat. There were runs scored late. Pitchers messing up, and the hitters getting big hits and controversial plays, and fans getting suspended for doing things that they shouldn't, and the road team winning all the games. There were just so many things that happened in this series. And these 2 teams, going forward, this offseason is going to be big for both of them because their key players are going to be free agents. For the Astros, Gerrit Cole, that's going to be one of the biggest storylines in all of baseball because of the impact that Gerrit Cole can have on a team. And you saw that in the past series against the Yankees, the difference maker Gerrit Cole was. And I talked about during that series, if it was Gerrit Cole and the Yankees might win that series and not the Astros. That's just the kind of impact that he has on a head-to-head matchup. So if I'm the Yankees or these other American League teams in particular, I definitely want to try to pry Gerrit Cole away from the Astros. I don't care what the cost is. He is worth it, especially the way he pitched in these playoffs. I know he wasn't as good in the World Series, but for the most part, he was tremendous. Him and Verlander, they're going to be neck and neck for Cy Young. He's now going to be 30, so it's hard to really continue that level of dominance, especially pitching this late into the year. It's really hard to replicate that, but Gerrit Cole is still going to be a top-tier pitcher, and seeing how good these 2 teams were and how close it was because of their top-tier pitching, we already know the importance of starting pitching because we've seen it in the past few World Series winners. We already know that. So teams are going to be trying to get Gerrit Cole. And the Nationals, we talk about their top-tier pitching. Steven Strasburg, the World Series MVP, he's going to be a free agent, and a lot of teams are going to be after him. Obviously, if you're a Met fan, you want to get him, but I think everybody should be in on Cole and everybody should be in on Strasburg because that's how important they are to success. And I think, for example, the way the Rays got Charlie Morton, that was one really good pitcher, but it made a huge difference for the Tampa Bay Rays, especially because he's one of those guys that's good in the playoffs. And after watching Strasburg be great the entire postseason and win the World Series MVP, you know that he's great in the postseason. So Strasburg is worth whatever he wants, in my opinion. I feel the same way about Gerrit Cole. I know Strasburg has had his injuries and what have you, but he really looks like he's healthy and that he's past all that. And honestly, the way baseball has gone, Tommy John surgery used to be the worst thing in the world. Now it almost seems like a requirement because of the way these players are able to bounce back and almost be better and more healthy after the surgery has been really fascinating. The way, just medicine and the way baseball has changed with the human body and the conditioning and the training and the strength, all the different things that go on to performance, especially within the human body. But then also for the Nationals, Anthony Rendon, I talked about for the Mets, but for the Yankees, their top goal should be getting Gerrit Cole to get him away from the Astros, give you a big difference maker in the head-to-head matchups. And for the Mets, like I said, Anthony Rendon should be your top priority in the head-to-head matchups versus the Nationals. I mean, Rendon on the Mets versus being on the Nationals, that makes a big difference. Yes, they'll still have Juan Soto and some other guys, but that's a big-time piece that you took away from the Nationals, and you really are able to hurt them and help yourselves because that's a position that you want to address. You don't really want Jeff McNeil at third base. You would like to have McNeil in the outfield or at second base and try to get rid of Robbie Cano, whether that's cutting him or just trading him to whoever. I don't want to make this a Mets podcast, but this offseason is going to be big, obviously, for the New York teams, but also for these two teams in particular. If the Astros lose Gerrit Cole or the Nationals lose Strasburg and or Rendon, it's going to be hard to go back to the World Series and win the World Series again if you don't have those players anymore and to be able to replace them, because the Nationals, they already spend a lot of money on their team, and they're going to have to pay Juan Soto a lot of money and eventually extend Trey Turner and make some other decisions with the team. And the same goes for the Astros. Eventually Correa and Bregman and Altuve and Springer have to get paid. Verlander's only going to be there so long. Like I said, Gerrit Cole's a free agent. What are you going to do with Zach Greinke, who actually pitched much better in Game 7 than I thought he was going to. You think about the anxiety problem that Greinke has. I thought that was going to get the best of him in this game, but it did not, as Greinke pitched much better than I thought. And one of the other interesting things from Game 7 was Will Harris finally failing. And this is a guy who was absolutely lights out in the division series against Tampa Bay and really, really good against the Yankees in the championship series. And he was good again in this round, but when he gave up that big home run, that was definitely surprising. But A.J. Hinch knew that Will Harris had been overused because he had been so good throughout the postseason that the Astros had to keep going to him time and time again. And eventually he just wore down. And we saw that the same thing happened to the Yankees, as they have a bunch of really good relievers. But eventually Chad Green and Tommy Kahnle and throughout the season, Ottavino, all these guys, they had, and even Chapman, they all faltered because these relievers can only take so much. You can't overuse them. And he tried to overuse Ozuna. Didn't work out. He gives up a run. Joe Smith, who had been tremendous in this postseason as well, he gives up a couple runs. And it just seemed like it was just the Nationals' fate. You can't make up these comebacks, no matter how you try to plan it or whatever matchups you try to do. The way Trent Grisham makes the error in right field, or the way Kershaw gives up the home run, and then Joe Kelly gives up the runs in the 10th inning, and then in this game, the way the Nationals come back, you just can't make that up. So whether Will Harris was rested or Joe Smith was used correctly, it just seemed like it was fate for the Nationals, and they were able to pull it off. And congrats to them. It hurts to say it as a Met fan, but you know what? They deserve it because, again, you just can't teach resiliency, and they have really good players. I mean, Juan Soto is a star, and I'm just afraid as a Met fan in the division to face him for such a long time, how much he's going to hurt the Mets. He's already hurt them a ton, being only 21, just like the way Gleyber Torres is only 22. That's all everyone wants to talk about. But, the team has a lot of talent, and it's going to be interesting to see, what both these teams do going forward, especially, like I said, with the offseason. How are they going to be able to, keep up this type of success and try to do it again? That's one of the toughest things to do, especially in a sport like baseball, the 162-game regular season, all the injuries that happen. It's very grueling, and that's why, back-to-back World Series champions are really hard to do. You can be a team like the Dodgers that goes there back-to-back, but winning it is very tough. You think of the Red Sox, they had the historic year last year. They were unstoppable, went right to the World Series. They didn't even make the playoffs, this year. So that's just how tricky baseball could be. And we will see what happens going forward. But that will do it for the World Series. Again, it was a really good one. It was a historic one. It was so back and forth. Good pitching. A lot of star hitters. Again, really, really good World Series. And the next baseball podcast will be when the Mets either finally decide to get a manager, they make a big move, which they're not going to, or when the Yankees make a big move, because I do think that's something that they should do and probably will do, because they can't keep, like the Nationals, not meeting expectations with the kind of talent they have. They need little pieces here or there, whether it is a Gerrit Cole or a Strasburg or other timely hitters or more pitching. We'll see what the Yankees do. That would be the next baseball podcast. And then obviously you'll have the football podcast every week. You'll have basketball podcasts during the week, a few, seeing how the Nets are doing. They lost tonight to the Pacers, so It has been a slow start for the Nets so far, and that's something I want to get into. Knicks playing a little better than you expected. RJ Barrett's been pretty good. And there's been a lot of interesting things going on in the NBA. I think of Steph Curry breaking his hand tonight, and obviously the injury to Zion Williamson. The big game Anthony Davis had last year. So a lot of good things going on with sports. Subscribe to keep up with the podcast I'll be posting. If you liked this video, leave a like. It definitely helps out. Comment on some feedback. What did you think of the World Series and these two teams? And what do you think about what's going to happen in the offseason? And, what teams are out there that are going to try to get one of these star players I talked about, guys like Cole, Rendon, Strasburg, and whoever else is out there. And anything else sports related, I'm always willing to have dialogue with you guys. But until the next one, have a good one, everybody.